allergic?
Yes, and there is only one cure.
Pinocchio's life, existence, future is constantly under threat, constantly menaced. Menace is constantly creeping at the edges of every scene. It's an extraordinarily disturbing and emotionally moving film.
Some story things went up and I go, well, that's really unusual by modern standards. But you're willing to forgive all that because of the kind of masterwork that the whole thing is.
Years and years ago, I talked to Frank Thomas about the movie. And of course, he had a great time working on it and thinks it's a masterpiece. One of the story points that he didn't think was resolved is in the sequence where Pinocchio makes it back home to find out that his father is gone and Figaro is gone and Cleo is gone. And how will they find out where his father is? And Frank says, I remember he was still very upset about it, and then out of all things, Frank would go, the blue fairy in shape of a dove comes down, you know, and drops this note to inform Pinocchio where the father is.
I understand that there are differing opinions about how effective the story is. I think it's important to remember that the book was written episodically. It was written for publication in a periodical, so it came out in little bits and pieces and then was put together into a book.
This is a story structure which is quite unlike anything which Disney had ever done before.
The episodic thread of it allows you to give a huge amount of scope to the film, just by all of these different places that Pinocchio and Jiminy have to go.
Come, the coach departs at midnight.
I think that the way it has been organized and arranged, it's a great story. For me, it serves as a springboard for an exploration of wonderful things that can be accomplished in animation.
Oh, Figaro. I forgot to open the window.
What I love about Pinocchio are the characters. I think that they really are by far the strongest cast of characters in any feature they've done because they all have such teeth to them.
You are sensational.
You mean I'm good?
I think that's one thing the film benefits from by the fact that it is episodic. You've got each of these set pieces for these marvelous, rich characters to come and interact with Pinocchio and Jiminy. And that really gives each of these animators the opportunity to make each of their characters really, really strong.
The whole thrust of what the Disney studio did in the 1930s had to do with personality animation, but that is the heart of the art. Creating these convincing personalities through the way the characters move is a lot of what the stories were all about, because the story grows out of what you can most effectively do with the characters.
When Walt Disney first started in the animation business, his films were based very largely on fantasy. They were just pencil drawings that were brought to life with very sketchy backgrounds. They were very fantastic in the sense that these characters could do anything.
If you look at the animation that preceded Pinocchio, all of them were great experiments. All of them were really amazing achievements, whether it was in the short films and the silly symphonies, or animation to music, or whether it was the push for personality animation. Everything was adding to the flavor of what was great animation. And in Pinocchio, everything clicked.
That settles it.
There's been a lot of talk in recent years about the 9 old men, who were the 9 artists who were pretty much the mainstay of the animation department for a lot of years. At the time we're talking about here, in the late 1930s, the 9 old men were still sort of the 9 young whippersnappers. And the guys who actually were the mainstays of the animation department then were people like Norm Ferguson, Fred Moore, people who had actually created the whole aesthetic of Disney animation during the 1930s.
Two of the stars on the animation staff at the studio at this time were Bill Teitla and Art Babbitt, who had really absorbed all the lessons of the 1930s at the studio, and in fact were the stars that the 9 old men looked up to.
Bill Teitla was, in the estimation of a lot of people, one of the greatest animators who ever lived. One of the things that he was really known for was his animation of really strong, powerful, forceful characters. I think he may be best known today for animating Chernobog in Night on Bald Mountain. So it's not too surprising to find him doing Stromboli.
Quiet! Shut him up! I knock you silly.
I just love the way Stromboli rocks the room. He just has such weight and power and comedy.
Introducing the only marionette who can sing and dance absolutely without the aids of a string.
And then you had somebody like Art Babbitt, who butted heads with Walt, different artistic opinions probably. Was a great animator, though. Did Country Cousin in the Academy Award-winning short film. Beautiful, beautiful animation. Had done the Queen in Snow White.
Art Babbitt's favorite performance that he did in animation was Geppetto. He really felt Geppetto was the best thing he had done, and he had done some marvelous things before that.
Fred Moore had been one of the major forces in the animation department in the 1930s, and he had a real knack with appealing, cute characters. So he really had done a lot to establish the look of a number of Disney characters during the 1930s. He is starting to recede a little bit at the time of Pinocchio. And his main contribution in the finished film is the animation of Lampwick. And in fact, Lampwick is a little bit of a self-caricature. He looks a little like Fred Moore.
Yeah, sure.
With Pinocchio, the balance starts to shift a little bit. And you get less and less of the people who had been prominent in the 30s and more of these younger artists who were in the process of becoming the Nine Old Men.
Here was the birth of something. Several of the great animators beginning what was to be their lifetime career of work in the Disney studio.
One thing that was really great about Pinocchio was the casting of the animators on their particular roles. Milt Kahl kind of locked Pinocchio as a character in terms of his design, in terms of how he was handled. Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, and others also handled the character in specific sequences. One of the things Frank probably doesn't get a lot of credit for is animating Pinocchio as a marionette before he comes to life, with Geppetto controlling him, and you see the kind of distorted image in Cleo's goldfish bowl.
From an animation standpoint, that was very challenging to try to get this to work. There's no way you could shoot live action of it to steady. You just had to make it up out of your own head.
But it feels like wood clattering on the floor. It's the perfect tour de force piece of physicalized animation. Ollie Johnston got to handle Pinocchio when he's telling the big lie to the blue fairy and his nose is growing and gets a bird's nest on it.
Ward Kimball, one of the great Disney animators, had worked very hard on a sequence of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I spent 8 months on it. Was all cleaned up and ready to be inked and painted. Walt sensed it stalled the plot at that point. So he called me to his office and he said, Ward, I hate to say this, but I'm going to have to take out this soup sequence. Of course, I was crestfallen, but right away he came in and he says, but I've got a little character in our next picture, and we're going to call him Jiminy Cricket, and I'd like to have you be the animation supervisor on this. My first impression of him was this ugly insect. And I said, how can that guy carry the picture? I said, my only answer to this is I've got to make him look funny. Well, Walt really didn't want a clown-looking cricket. As he put it, make him cute, Kimball.
And the character changed and morphed. And so he became the little blue man or the little green man, or he was this little man without any ears, until it became a character which really we only know is a cricket because we're told it's a cricket.
Eric Larson's tour de force in this film was Figaro, the cat. He gave Figaro the personality of a little spoiled kid. Probably his most famous scene is when Geppetto's telling Figaro not to eat his dinner before Pinocchio comes home, and he just kind of goes into that little huff.
This is where we cross from realism into fantasy, in my opinion. When we take an animal like Figaro, move him around as a kitten would move around. You don't take any liberties with that kind of action. But now you inject into him the personality of this young kid who is used to having everything he wanted,
You can just empathize with that little character, and for such a lovely little guy, he's always frustrated, angry, jealous. You can just riff off all these things that make him so human.
It probably was Eric Larson's best work, you know. When you click with a character and it's really alive on the screen, it's there forever.
Aw.